Hello everybody, it's me, Fee Timms, also known as White Zulu. I must explain from the start that the old apartheid flag, die Vierkleur, in my new background does not represent a political statement in any way whatsoever. My autobiography, White Zulu, is not a political commentary, nor does it include any particular references to apartheid and what it entailed. That flag is consigned to history now, and as I had no means of imposing a photograph on top of it, it remains on my wall. All that flag represents is a piece of history covering the first 44 years of my life. So please ignore it as exactly what it is. A meaningless piece of cloth now consigned. And I'm going to continue with my Swiss mischief adventures. And this one is called Gstaad and Glaciers. And it starts like this. One day, Pierre drove the five of us, himself, Britta, Louis Ami, John T, and myself over to Gstaad, the ski resort just over the Swiss-German border, and only about 20 miles from Chateau d'Ay. A friend of his had a job at the extremely large, luxurious and expensive Palace Hotel, and had invited Pierre and his friends over any time for a swim in the huge indoor pool there. I thought a bathing costume had been a strange thing to pack for a ski trip, but Madame had put it on the list of clothing I'd need. Now, I was only too pleased that I had mine with me, as did the others. Gstaad is quite the opposite of Chateau d'Ay, in that it's the playground for the very rich and famous. People like Elizabeth Taylor kept a large and luxurious private chalet there all year round, and it was the favourite ski resort for the younger members of the British royal family. Princesses Margaret and Anne had been seen there regularly, as had Prince Charles. The place had several vast and magnificently expensive hotels and shops that carried the latest in all designer ski wear, as well as après-ski outfits, and one could buy Cartier and the other wonderful costly things in the shops there. I was so relieved that the girls didn't do their shoplifting when their boyfriends were around, as I suspect certainly Pierre would have been as shocked as I was and would have forbidden it. So we looked in the huge display windows of these extravagantly laid out places, gasped at the prices, and walked on. We took the lifts up to ski some of their more challenging runs. The Dome, at 3,016 meters, looked over to Mont Blanc, higher at 4,810 meters. And the views alone were breathtaking. The runs were fantastic and much longer and steeper than anything our beloved La Braille could offer. We skied all day until we were breathless and exhausted, and then walked over to be let into the Palace Hotel through the staff entrance, and spent the rest of the evening soaking our bodies in the deliciously warm and pristine water, which sparkled gold in the rays of the setting sun through the big glass-domed roof over it. Couldn't afford to buy even a baguette to share at Gstaad prices. Went home to find that Therese had made us a big and most delicious cheese fondue. We were ravenous and scraped the pot clean with our bits of bread. And I got quite drunk on this lovely dish as the main ingredient, after lots of excellent Gruyere cheese, is white wine. Another occasion, quite soon before we were to take our test to win our gold medals, Roger Leblanc hired a minibus and enlisted the help of Roger Lenoir, the other instructor I'd such a crush on, for a day's excursion for our class of 8 to ski on Les Diablerets, the glacier on the slopes above Gstaad. Glacier skiing can be tricky, and they primed us carefully beforehand on all the dangers. There are deep crevasses on the glacier, and the ski trail is marked with red flags on tall poles where the crevasses lay. Some of the ice bridges between these ravines were very narrow, and one had to keep one's skis neatly, very close together, whatever speed we were going, as there was no room to turn or snowplow in order to slow down. As we packed our gear into the back of the minibus in the village, I stood up and came face to face with Roger Lenoir. Again, he slowly and deliberately pushed his sunglasses up onto his head, but stared deep into my eyes this time. What he must have seen there was pure, raw longing, yearning for his attention, and all I saw were his darkly attractive but inscrutable eyes. Again, I felt he was sizing me up, and by now I was so desperate for a boyfriend, I would have flung myself into his arms. He was the #1 catch in Gstaad, and from afar I'd seen him always accompanied by at least one beautiful woman. I almost told myself not to get my hopes up, as he was way out of my league, but I knew I'd run to him at the slightest encouragement and hang the consequences. We rode up the various lifts to the top of Les Diablerets and began our first run. We were about a quarter of the way down, with the most difficult obstacles about to be negotiated, when the sky suddenly went dark. An icy wind whipped up the snow at our feet, and it began to snow heavily. Within minutes we were in a whiteout blizzard and couldn't even make out where our fellow skiers were, never mind the red flags over the crevasses. The 2 instructors called us into a huddle and told us to form a chain, linking our ski poles together, and with one Roger at the front and the other at the back, our little class of 8 made a snail-like journey to the first lift they could find in the blizzard. I didn't have goggles, and being so myopically short-sighted, I was even more blinded by the big, stinging snowflakes that battered my face. I kept quiet, though, glad I was tucked in behind the formerly mad, but now subdued Kiwi, with Brita behind me. Eventually, what seemed like days after we'd set off, but was probably several hours, we came to a ski lift, followed the pylons until these led us to a drop-off point, whereupon we all, exhausted and frozen, climbed thankfully into the chairs to descend to safety. It was a silent ride back to our village as we all contemplated our recent brush with what could have been disaster. Those crevasses are notoriously bottomless, and the landscape changed all the time as the Les Diablerets glacier made its slow and timeless way down the valley. A week or so later, there were only a few days left before Jonty and Britta were due to return home to their respective countries. They'd arrived before I had, and I was booked on to stay for another month anyway, before going on to my finishing school in Vevey. We asked Roger Leblanc, our official instructor, when we could take our tests and get our gold medals, but he was evasive. At first, he told us we weren't ready yet. We still had to complete the glacier skiing course. Then, when we said we were prepared to take the chance and do the test, even if we could fail, he prevaricated again and said, soon, very soon. The day came, and it was time for the girls to leave. Jonty and Britta were booked to catch the funiculaire out of Châteaudet at lunchtime, so as to be able to get the train to Geneva Airport and fly home to England and Denmark, respectively. Again, we raced up to meet Roger Leblanc on the first available lift to beg him to test us three anyway for our gold medal. But there was no sign of him, and we hung around the usual meeting point where all our advanced lessons began for as long as we dared, before dejectedly we took off for home for the girls to do their final packing and leave. The three of us had ended up very close friends, in spite of our differences on some points of view, and there were tearful goodbye hugs all round and promises to stay in touch via postcard, having exchanged home addresses among ourselves. Mine would be at my next place in Vevey on Lake Geneva. And off they went without their gold medals and with no hope whatsoever in achieving one now. We were all deeply disappointed in the Swiss ski school's most advanced instructor. Never mind. Perhaps you'll get your chance as you have another month here, said Jonty comfortingly. But she was wrong. By now it was April. The snow was melting off the normal slopes, and what was left was wet, slushy, and very unpleasant to ski on. The ski season was more or less over, and the main reason I was staying on in that resort was that I couldn't get a place in the finishing school until the 1st of May that year. My stay with the Anjou family had been such a success that it was a happy coincidence that I was to remain in their care for another month. That night at supper, Pierre dropped his bombshell. I'm going to marry Britta, he said, almost casually. Madame dropped her fork onto her plate with a clatter, and there was a long pause as this news sank in. We've set a wedding date in her hometown in Denmark for the end of this month, and you're all invited. You too, Fiona. He turned to me as I sat there, bug-eyed with astonishment. Madame finally regained her breath and quietly but kindly asked me to leave the room, taking my plate with me to go and watch TV in the little den. Est-ce qu'elles sont anciennes? Is she pregnant? I overheard her demand, just after I left the table, before I had the chance to shut the TV room door behind me. Apparently not, I discovered later on that evening as the four of us sat in their living room and his parents thrashed out the whys and wherefores of the sudden decision. Brita had been taking the pill, I heard, and there was no baby on the way. They were just two young people who'd fallen in love and so saw no reason or point in a long engagement. I recalled some of the stories my cousin Sandra had told me about her crush on Pierre, even though he had lots of girlfriends. I'd never seen him with any other girl other than Brita, but had sometimes wondered whether he had girlfriends in the town he lived in while at work during the week in Vevey. Celeste, as I was to call Madame now that we were just the family, was absolutely horrified. Pierre was only 22 and had, with the exception of my cousin Sandra, either fallen in love with or had had a crush on one of every little group of 3 girls she'd had in her care since he'd been 16. He was a serial faller and lover, but nothing ever came of it as the girls moved on back to their respective countries. Not so long ago, he'd been deeply in love with a pretty blonde Kenyan girl in the good times, and several others. In fact, every season he'd been an item with one of his mother's charges. So what made Brita so special that he was going to throw his life away at 22? She had no qualifications, nor had she any intention of training for any skills with which she would be able to supplement his meagre income. In our chats, when we were just the 3 of us, Brita had made it clear to us both that she was just waiting for the right guy to come along and would marry him and spend the rest of her life living on his income and maybe have a baby or 2. She certainly had no ambitions of furthering her education and basically had been sent to Switzerland because her divorced parents didn't really know what else to do with her. Brita had even less ambitions for her future than I did, and that's saying something. Another thing that concerned me slightly, but I kept to myself, was that Brita had openly flirted with the local guys and sometimes even went out dancing, skating, or just dating with them when Pierre wasn't around, and didn't seem to want to keep her relationship with him exclusive. If he couldn't get up there, she'd go off quite happily with Louis and me and Jonty, and since I wasn't invited along on those outings, I had some idea of what she got up to, and I knew that there were plenty of flirtations with local boys involved, as they gossiped and giggled about them together afterwards when we 3 sat up in their room smoking. She was 18, as was I, after all, and not ready to settle down, except for now. I'd also seen her dancing cheek to cheek with several local boys at the ice rink in a most intimate manner. That is all for the time being, and there's more to come next week. I would like to thank John Moslane for putting aside his Friday afternoons to help me produce these videos. Without him, I could not do this. I would also like to thank Sean van Vuren for his sterling work in uploading my videos to my YouTube channel adding the photos, as well as managing my channel so professionally. If you would like to know more about my other works, I have written 5 books in all, and each one is autobiographical. Please visit my website at www.whitezulubook.com, where you will find a lot more information as well as plenty of photographs. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed my life story, and there is plenty more to come. A thumbnail photo will be attached each week, and thank you so much for all your support and all the very kind remarks you make in complimenting me on my work. I really appreciate it.